So, I mean, to take those people just now who are, well, I mean, the people say those who have depression, in air
Right.
quotes, you know, not
Mm-hmm.
not the chemical balance depression, but the blues or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Yeah.
How can we grade like bad things? You know, how do we know at what point that's actually a proper problem, or is every problem a way of saying, "Oi, this is something you need
Yeah.
to deal with. This is look at me. You should be dealing with this to avoid it happening again."
Yeah.
How can we reframe it?
It's such a challenging thing, depression. It's like the chicken and the egg. So what was it happen? Was it the dialogue that happened first or the chemical imbalance in my brain that happened first? At some point, they're both in sync. So what I'm saying and how I'm feeling are in sync. So I'm not smart enough to know which one came first. I do know they're both very real. And so people who use antidepressants to deal with the chemical imbalance, that's fine. You'll also notice, though, as you're taking the antidepressants, you'll talk about things in more of an upswing. So people will say, well, my outlook's better. Your outlook gets formed in language. So you're talking differently than you were before. So it's kind of like this, and then there'll be this point where the chemical balance of your brain and the language are again in sync, but this time it's kind of on an upswing. So I would say to anybody who's in those states, you ought to start realizing that with every word that falls out your mouth, you're either condemning yourself or rising yourself. And I know it's not easy. I know there's times when, like, you're desperate. And you got to start somewhere. And if that means, you got to go and get the meds and all that stuff, that's all fine. But you also got to realize you got to start retraining yourself, the way you talk about yourself, the way you talk about language, life, the way you talk about people, and start to frame it for yourself in a way that works for you, that empowers you, that doesn't make you resentful or angry or resigned, but in fact lights you up. Because that's the ebb and flow of your emotional state, is in the kinds of conversations you're having with yourself and others.
Because, I mean, some people might even just get better by thinking it differently. Because, like you were mentioning before, is you change the world. You create the new neural pathways when you start thinking more positively. So does that mean then maybe your brain is getting better? Are you getting an upswing in mood and all that because you're going a more positive approach with a thought?
Yeah. Well, I mean, go ahead.
Sorry. Well, how can they say it's the chemicals when you're changing your outlook on life? Right,
and that really is the question. And by the way, as far as everything I've read anyway, no one's answering that question. No one's saying, well, it was the chicken first, or was it the egg? Oh, no, it was the egg first. Nobody's saying. So in the absence of any definitive proof, and again, both things being very real, I would say to people, you got to do with it what you can. You got to do with it whatever you can. I'll give you an example of the narrative changing, though. So that I think might be useful to people. So I'd lived my childhood. My father was quite the drinker. He full international honours for Scotland. My father was a cooper. He made whiskey barrels. And he drank a lot of what was in those things. And my mother basically raised the four of us on her own. My father was gone for most of my childhood. And by the time I got out of that childhood, I had a lot of resentment. Amazingly enough, not for my dad, but for my mom. Like, I was very angry at her for what I thought she should have done. And how she fucked my childhood up. And how she was selfish and only cared about herself. And that, didn't give a damn for me. And I was the forgotten child. I was the youngest. I was the only boy. And it was fine, though. I mean, I was like 17, 18, 19, 20. I still had a pretty positive outlook in life. It wasn't until I got into my late 20s I realized that I wasn't letting it go. It was still with me. And I had a working kind of relationship with my mom at the time. I mean, it was like, I'm going to see my mom. But there was no free flow between her and I. There was this kind of obstacle. And we didn't argue, we didn't fight. There was this kind of like space where I couldn't quite be myself. And then when I started to do this work, and I realized that how I'd turned out wasn't a function of what she'd done, but rather a function of what I said to myself about what she'd done. And those are two different things. So for those of you listeners that are in an argument, currently still in an argument with your parents, because your parents won't agree to your version of events. Like you say this happened and they say that never happened. Well, here's the reality. It didn't happen. Why? Because there's 8 billion views of life on the planet, and you're arguing over whose is right. And the reality is they both are. The movie's the movie regardless of the seat you're in. You get the movie according to where you're sitting. And that's the same in life. The problem is, though, my reality, I seek agreement for my reality. So I might ask my siblings, I might talk to my friends about it, and they're all nodding their fucking head like, yeah, she was a bitch. That's right, Gary. And then when I started to do this work, I started to realize I was an asshole. That I'd killed the relationship with my mom and blamed her and blamed her and blamed her and blamed her. And every time she did something that was aligned with what I was blaming her for, I jumped all over it like evidence and proof. Like, see? There she fucking goes again. And the reality was the woman had no chance with me. Now, I'm not saying she was like a saint. She had her own shit to deal with. The problem was my childhood was about judging the job that she'd done. Like there I am, 9, determining what she should have done better with me. Or 12, or 14, or 17. And there was a point in all of that when I got her humanity. When I got she was fucking struggling. And it was hard. And she gave it her best shot. And she fucked some things up. And it's okay, I made it. And it wasn't always the way I'd wanted it to be. And I wanted blankets and chicken soup and, you know, I love you. And I didn't get that. That wasn't my childhood. And she didn't love me the way that I thought she should. She did it her way, which was by telling me where I fucked up. But what I started to realize was that I could have compassion for her. And I could love her just the way she is. I don't have to change anything about her. And I could invite something into my life that I hadn't let into my life since I was a little boy. And that is the love of a mother. And I didn't need my mother there to experience the love of a mother. It was like I could let myself be with that I was loved. And it was fucking radical. It was like magical. It was like, holy shit. And the whole paradigm changed for me. Like I couldn't even look at her the same way. Whenever she got upset, I'd just be like, yeah, it's my mom. So what she does, it's okay. Nobody's going to die. So that's an example of how like you can reframe your whole past such that it has an impact on you that it actually nourishes you. Or you can just choose the one you have and have it eat you up like a fucking cancer.